Hello there, and welcome to yet another Game for Thought live stream. This is the season 4 finale of Game for Thought, and I am thrilled. I am so excited. I cannot believe where the time went this academic year. I'm super thrilled to bring to you another live stream focusing on another ethically relevant topic in the games and digital entertainment industry. Whether you are joining from Belgium, whether you're joining from abroad, or later on via YouTube, or if you find us on the interwebs, welcome. My name is Ali Weiss. I am the ethics coordinator in international game development at Hoest Digital Arts and Entertainment, commonly called DIE, located in Kortrijk, Belgium, where we are streaming from this evening. If you are new to Game for Thought, you are very welcome here. If you are a repeat watcher, welcome back. Just a quick overview of the Game for Thought series, the origins. So as I said before, this is the season 4 finale. We've had 4 academic years of streaming every third Wednesday of the month about a different ethically relevant, socially relevant topic in games and digital entertainment. We've covered topics such as mental health in the industry, sustainability, accessibility, dark design patterns, esports, community building, ethics and AI, all sorts of topics. And this evening, we are joined with 4 absolutely fantastic panelists with the goal of covering the topic of games and politics. Just to let you know, if you have any questions for our panelists this evening, please be sure to leave a question in the comment section. All you have to do is just put a Q beforehand so we know it's a question, but you're very welcome in the comment section always. Joining us this evening, as I said, 4 wonderful human beings, game developers, game designers, PhD candidates. I'm thrilled to welcome Paolo Pedercini. Paolo is a game developer, artist, and educator at Carnegie Mellon University in the US, located in Pittsburgh. Up next, we have Altaparmakov, and Konst is a senior game designer at 11-Bit Studios, joining us from Bulgaria. We also have Anthony Longo. Anthony is joining from the other side of Belgium, all the way in Antwerp, and he is a PhD candidate in philosophy at the University of Antwerp. And last but not least, we have Adam Mirkowski, and Adam is a game designer and writer at Break the Loop. So I'm very much looking forward into what these panelists have to say about the topic of games and politics. If anything that anybody says interests you, leave it in the chat, ask your questions, and I really look forward to spending this evening with you all during the Game for Thought Season 4 finale. Hang tight, we'll grab the panelists, and we will see you in just a second. Alrighty, and as promised, we are back, joined by four wonderful panelists for this evening. It's always a lot more interesting if said wonderful panelists introduce themselves briefly. Joining us from all over Europe, but also across the Atlantic from the US, Adam, Anthony, Konst, and Paolo. I'm thrilled to have you here. Welcome. Can we get some appreciation in the chat for our panelists this evening? Some appreciation and love. Wonderful. Adam, I'm sorry to put you first again. During the tech check, I also did the same thing. Sorry to put you on the spot. But if Adam, you could start, if you could just briefly introduce yourself and maybe just briefly why you're interested in this topic.
Of course. So my name is Adam, and I'm a game designer. I work in 11-bit studio at Frostpunk 2 project. It's a sequel, as you can guess from the title. Sequel for a game about society survival in a harsh environment. So the player is facing not only nature, but also human nature and people who are pushing the city in a different directions. And that's so that explains a little bit my interest in politics, for sure. Besides that, I'm writing a newsletter/blog, and it's called Break the Loop. You can find it at adammirkowski.substack.com. And I'm trying to focus on the what makes games worth playing. So I'm trying to focus on developer and design perspective, on making games that are meaningful and worth time, or worth time of the player. So yeah, besides that, I have been working in some indie companies. I worked in the company that made game 911 Operator. It's a game about managing emergency services and answering calls, emergency calls. And the game called Hellcards. It's a co-op roguelike deck builder, so it's sort of like a Slay the Spire with friends. And games and politics are a very interesting topic in my opinion, because it's so it could be so unique to games, how to implement and perceive politics in it. So I'm glad to be here and discuss it further.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam. I'm really thrilled to have you here this evening. Thank you very much for your lovely introduction. And again, going with the theme of A names, Anthony, I see you next. Hello there, Anthony.
Hi everyone. Thank you for introducing me. So my name is Anthony. I'm a PhD student in philosophy at the University of Antwerp. I'm now in the third year, which means that I should be starting to wrap up my thesis. And yeah, I'm actually doing research on how digital media and in particular algorithms change the way we do politics. And video games, of course, play a big role in that, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly, but because increasingly politicians and activists are using video games to express themselves politically. But at the same time, on a more implicit level, we see that video game design elements are also being introduced into politics, and that politics becomes increasingly more important in video games. So I'm very interested in asking, as a philosopher, how does that even change the very conception of politics that we hold? So yeah, I'm very excited to be here and to learn from you all about the real life of video games and me coming out of my ivory tower.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think it's really important. Also, thank you, Anthony, that we talk within or across different domains. So I think your background in philosophy is super interesting. I also did not study anything game related. My background's in psychology and philosophy. And again, yeah, I just think it's really important to talk across domains and not always within our circles. So thank you very much for being here with us this evening. And Cons, hello there.
Hello. Thank you for having us, Ali. Hello, everyone. My name is Cons. Like Adam, I work at 11-bit Studios, but I'm based in my home country of Bulgaria. Before, I worked on Assassin's Creed for around 10 years. And now I'm super happy at 11-bit Studios working on as Adam said it, like meaningful games and games that are worth playing, and they're provoking and interesting. And super happy to be here and discuss this very interesting topic and to explore it philosophically, also from game developers' perspective. And yeah, generate some food for thought and have a nice discussion.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Const. So you actually worked together with Adam, but you have never met each other, nor did you really know that you were colleagues before this stream. So it's how small the world is.
That's the beauty of globalization.
Yeah.
It really is. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Const. And last but not least, joining us from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is Paolo Pedercini. Hello, Paolo.
Hi, thank you for having me. Yeah, my name is Paolo Pedercini. I make games as Molleindustria. I've been making games for over 20 years now. I started in 2003, this project. And it is a project that I say like a bit pretentiously. It aims to reappropriate video games as a mean for political communication and so on, which it sounded a little bit more original and provocative 20 years ago. Luckily, like some progress had been made, and this idea is not that alien anymore, and so we can even have like discussions about it rather than is it even a thing. I also teach game development and digital media here in Pittsburgh. Maybe I mentioned that I'm originally from Italy, but I've been in the United States for about like 15, 17 years. And I also curate games. I organize events in a little gallery game space in which I show almost every month a collection of a little exhibition or center around a theme, often dealing with of games and experimental playable media, often dealing with political or actuality issues, current affair issues.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paolo. It's a true honor to have you here. I really appreciate the time that you're taking for this. Same goes with all four of you. Thank you for joining us this evening. And let's jump in to the pre-submitted questions, and we'll kick it off with question number 1. So the topic here, games and politics. There are a lot of people, maybe those also watching the stream, maybe students studying at DIE, maybe colleagues as well, that are firm believers that games should be a neutral space, a space in which people can escape from everyday life and the burdens of everyday life and perhaps not really actually be confronted with issues of politics, that they should simply enjoy and have freedom in the land of entertainment without the burdens of society. I'm wondering what your views are regarding this. You all have worked within the scope of politics, whether it be in philosophy or in game development. So I'm curious to know what your take is, what your opinion is regarding people who say that games really should remain a neutral ground, free from political leaning, and really there for escapism. And whoever would like to jump in, go right ahead. Take it away. Any of the four of you.
I can start.
Go right ahead, Adam.
Yeah, because I love games as entertainment, as a sort of escapist zone. But on the other hand, I think that it's difficult to avoid politics in a broader sense. I think the definition of politics could be understood in a different ways. And one of these ways is just to associate politics with actual politicians, with elections, with all arguments in the radio or the TV. But the definition that really speaks to me is that politics is about who gets what, when, and how. It was coined by Laswell. And I think it's saying, in looking at politics from that perspective, it's almost like a game design of reality. So it's something like we are setting the rules for how our world, how our society, how our countries should look like. And it's not only about very hot political subjects, but even smaller stuff like public transport or what we eat every day and so on. And in that sense, I believe that games are political in a spectrum. Sorry, it's not like binary choice or games either political or not. It's more like a game could be very involved in political topics. It could be its main goal could be to tackle a very controversial topics, or it could be trying to be focused more on its own mechanics. So, for example, abstract games like Tetris or sports games like FIFA aren't that aren't having that many politics in themselves. But on the other hand, sometimes they actually need to face the politics, as Tetris was a subject of politics when capitalist companies wanted to buy commercial rights from Soviet Union, where the game was invited. Uh, and FIFA, a soccer game, actually faced the dilemma: should it remove Russian players and Russian teams from this game after the full-scale invasion of Russia to the Ukraine? And it was a political decision, even if that it's a sports game. It was unavoidable to make a political decision, because not banning those players would be also a political decision. So I think it's very difficult to avoid politics entirely. I think just a lot of players doesn't want to be preached about it. But we need to be conscious about this political environment, and that our product is somehow political.
There were several really interesting points that you made there, Adam. One being, the game doesn't need to explicitly have a controversial opinion or be tackling some kind of controversial topic in order to have a link with politics. Maybe, for example, as you say, it's the social norms or the systems that exist in the world of the game. It's much more broader than controversy, I think. And also, you make a really interesting point with those two examples that it's maybe not within the game itself that politics has a meaning, but within the games industry. It's really, and within the world in general, it's very hard actually to live in a bubble in which politics does not interfere. Anyone else would like to add to that? Konst, Anthony, or Paolo?
Yeah, I really like what Adam said, because I kind of find political teams in different games, and sometimes they're smaller one, and sometimes they're bigger, and the way that they're presented in those games is something also very interesting, because it's communicated to the player, and sometimes maybe you can gain a perspective or think about things that otherwise normally you do not think. As even as simple as public transportation, as Adam said, that for example, if you're working on a city builder, and then it's like, how do you make that public transportation, and how do you think about all the people, and suddenly this is a topic that you're thinking about it, and it's like, this is very interesting. And I think in all the games you can find the underlying political themes. I really kudos Adam of finding the political stuff in FIFA, because I honestly didn't thought about this at all, and I actually missed the news that they're considering this. But yeah, so great points. And definitely, I think political themes are present in video games, and it's how to phrase it. They're there, and it's like it's a matter of how they are presented.
Anthony or Paolo, anything to add there before I jump into the next question?
I think the answers are great. Are great. I perfectly agree. I completely agree with everything said so far. Yeah, I would maybe like add every time I hear like the idea of political neutrality, or not being political, being neutral in that sense. Usually kind of just means align with the status quo, whatever that means, right? Like, or like if your game is doesn't strike as political or controversial or thought-provoking, usually it means that it's just portraying things as they are now, and so the art is basically following whatever if it's an economic simulation, there is a capitalism system that is the capitalist system that is not questioned. If there are characters, the power relationship between these characters, the racial relationship between these characters are just reproducing what's already out in the world. So I would encourage people to think political neutrality as maybe is just essentially like this business as usual. And the other aspect that I think is also worth repeating is that there is politics that sort of like enters at many in many levels, at many layers, including like the politics of labor in when making games. That is often also connected with the content on how games look like, or how they are made matters. Whether people are unionized or not, whether the game developers can be laid off on a whim or not, and who's in charge of deciding which projects get made and so on, as well as politics of related to resources like technology in general, or the manufacture of hardware, planned obsolescence, and all these things that are not about the representational aspect of games as sort of like storytelling device, or device that are representing things through systems of rule, but are still there, kind of like the more like material level under the surface underneath. So.
Yeah, I think already this conversation, pieces of what I'm hearing, it also echoes a few of the statements that were made. A couple months ago, we had a stream about religion in games as well. And the aspects in which actually religious themes or religious elements show their face in many ways that players actually aren't aware of, whether it's within the game itself or at other layers. So very interesting takes there. I want to follow up with a question about responsibility of game developers. I know this, for example, will be a really interesting question for our students watching there who are the future game developers of the industry. I want to ask if game developers themselves have an innate responsibility to include political themes within their games. Is this a responsibility that should be taken on by developers, or should it be a personal choice?
Maybe I can make a start here. As you know, responsibility is such a big topic in philosophy that I feel like I should say something. Um, it's interesting that, related also to the first question, the term politics in relation to video games is at the same time underused and overused. So on the one hand, we see that video game companies and like the people of Call of Duty are saying, no, what we're doing is not political, it's entertainment, it's art. And at the same time, when like one time there's a minority being a main character, it's suddenly political according to the right-wing gamers that don't really appreciate it. The question of responsibility, I think, also has to do with how we use or how we navigate the term political in itself. And I think it all starts with acknowledging the positionality, the political, but also the geopolitical positionalities that are embedded in game design to begin with. And there was this controversial case of Resident Evil 4, where there was this like very controversial figure from the US Army. I think I forgot his name, who was like a colonel or something and was involved in Iran. And somewhere in the game, the message is being given that at all costs we should protect the United States or something like that. And the narrative that is being portrayed there is really like us versus them, and that the us should be protected from alien forces. And that in itself is, of course, not a very neutral story. So starting to acknowledge that to begin with, and then use that maybe to subvert and maybe surprise gamers, I think that is maybe not a responsibility, but a big opportunity that game designers should take and should be able to take.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting the last sentence that you say. Maybe it's not a responsibility, but an opportunity. I'm wondering if any of the other panelists would like to add on to that.
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting thing because it's sort of an opportunity too. But if I would say that if you are making a game in a tiniest bit inspired by reality, it's as we said in the previous question, it's very difficult to avoid politics entirely. And if you are not paying attention what political message the game contains, it will happen anyway, but without your active input. So you may say by your game, by mechanics of your game, something that some sort of message that you just don't want to say. And I think the good example is that something that Cons also mentioned in the previous question, some city builder games. It's a genre close to my heart, and one of the best games in the industry is SimCity series. And SimCity was made as a sort of a toy box, some sort of, even the main creator called it like a caricature of real city, some kind of a toy. But over the years, the mechanics that SimCity established become a topic for also serious gaming. So SimCity become a thing that sometimes it's used on some sort of academic discussion or for education, or some politicians also played in the SimCity as a part of their campaigns or something like that. And the game has some sort of messages that aren't opinions of the creator particularly. So, for example, the game is heavily based on district structure. So, industries is collapsed in the one part of the city, housing is in another. It's a very common topic in city builders, even in Frostpunk 2. But in a modern view, this type of planning the city is not very beneficial from the perspective of a crime, of different differences in welfare between districts, and so on. So I think that's it's very nuanced and complicated topic. So it's definitely worth to pay a close attention what political meaning your game has, and not only by words or narrative or story, but also mechanics that you implemented to the game.
I would add to that also you need to be careful, because as Anthony said, I think it is both opportunity, but I think we also as developers have some responsibility of what exactly political themes we are putting in the game, because sometimes things can go to the extreme, and this can lead to either backlash to the game, or even if the game is more popular, real life consequences. And Anthony, again, you mentioned Call of Duty, and this just reminds me how every time when you play Call of Duty or most of the shooters, the bad guys are always Middle Eastern or Russians or whatever. And I think there was one of the games where there was like an Evo American or something like that, and it was like, oh, it's a twist. Okay, yeah. So definitely there should be a responsibility of the developers themselves and what they're pushing for, and be mindful that this is something that is out in the world, and players are going to experience it and see it, and potentially you're planting ideas in their heads, and they'll think about it, and this can have reflections even in their real life.
Yeah, I'm really glad, Konst, that you mentioned also that while you say that it is the responsibility, it can go also to the extreme. And actually that perfectly segues into my next question. about the effectiveness of either offering within your game really covert, explicit political messages, or kind of if you make a game that has more overt, underhanded political themes. If you are trying to get your message across, if you are trying to plant a seed, for example, in consumers' heads, which strategy is more effective to really really in your face, putting a provocative or political message in your game, or doing it underhandedly, and trying to kind of weave it through the story. Paolo, I actually want to take it to you for this question. Because actually, if I look up your name, for example, on Wikipedia, it's like one of the first words that comes up is like makes provocative video games. And so I'm really curious to know what your opinion is about either putting a message very clear in the game or kind of weaving it in behind the scenes.
Yeah, I hate to be the one that answers, well, it depends, but it kind of depends. I mean, it depends on the message that you want to convey. It depends on the audience that you're choosing to select for yourself, for your games. And I think I did. So one thing that I always try to do is to be kind of like explicit, not explicit as in kind of like screaming at you that you have to recycle or whatever, but more like explicit in that, like, I'm not trying to hide the fact that there is ideology or where it is coming from a point of view. Mostly to me is a way to highlight that all other games, especially the ones that are more on the reality depicting side of the spectrum, most of the games have whether the designers want or not, have some kind of like values that are incorporated, embedded into their gameplay and stories and whatnot. And so to me, like making like I don't know, like an economic sort of like a tycoon game, or that is a bit of a parody of a tycoon game that is very explicit in the way critics, the McDonald's corporation or the oil industry and things like that. To me, that is a way to kind of like being essentially honest with the players, and also to point at how the other games that are pretending to be neutral or to be like not politically motivated also have essentially have these values, have certain values or certain ideologies based on the way they work. So beside that, I think I kind of like tried many different ways, for example, the game and reference in the McDonald's video game, my kind of presents itself as a like normal game that is being sort of like injected in the what was the Flash sort of like online gaming world, and so it was kind of like blending in with games that are not propaganda. And then maybe like the political message arrives a little bit later, or like what it's trying to do becomes a little bit more clear a little bit later. But more recently, honestly, I'm less interested in that more like covert way or more subversive way, and more into the people I really want to talk about, the game, the players I really want to talk about are players that are already in a way agreeing with me. So I'm not really trying to convince or to trick them into playing my games. They are already people who are engaged in some form of world-changing activity, and I want to have a conversation about how you do that, or what is the future that we are looking at, that we are building, and so on. And so maybe like I shifted my approach also in relation to that.
Yeah, you mentioned the McDonald's video game. I'm going to be very transparent. Before the stream, I was talking about how it was really, honestly, one of my favorite and most memorable video games growing up. So a little bit of a fangirl moment, but I really loved that game, and my siblings did too. But it's really interesting what you say about not wanting to necessarily like shove a message down the player's throat, but at the same time, you really want to be honest and transparent with what you are trying to get across with the game. I'm wondering if the other panelists have anything to say there. Cons, go right ahead.
Yeah. I think that specifically for the political messages, it's somewhere. I think things should be somewhere in the middle, like maybe not too covert, because like you might miss them, or not that much in your face. I think a good example that I was thinking about since you invite me to this is the Deus Ex, the new ones, like Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, where they are exploring the themes like racism, and I think it was really well done there, where you have this whole thing about racism and everything, and it was like really distilled and really nicely created in the game. So it clearly gets the message across, and it's really thought provoking, and it's exaggerated, of course, and it's not. It's related to the cyberpunk people there and all that, but I think it really resonated of, okay, this is like pretty realistic for some people in some countries, and that's why I would say if it's somewhere in the middle, it will be probably the best, as long as you convey the themes and people understand them. Yeah, and I have this personal fear that if they're too covered, people might miss them.
Yeah, exactly. If it's very covert, the message actually might not be successful in being brought across. Sure.
Can I jump in here?
Go ahead.
Yeah,
And this is the part of the stream where we play rock, paper, scissors, shoot to
Yeah.
see who goes first.
There's
Anthony, go right ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just reminded of like a similar case where a judge would sentence like a teenage boy to read the novels by Charles Dickens to become a better person. And I haven't come across like a case myself where a judge would, sentence someone to play a video game, but I can easily imagine that happening quite soon. And what we learn from the cases with like reading novels and seeing films for similar reasons is that it just doesn't work if it's not intrinsically if the watching the film or playing the game or reading the novel doesn't come from intrinsic motivation to start with, because only then you can approach the contents you're presented with like an openness and a suspension of judgment, without having like an external goal you have to reach, like for example becoming a better person. And it's in that suspension of judgment where that openness is so valuable also on a political level, because then you're open to receive other perspectives that you might not have considered. And at the same time, I was also thinking that if the message is too clear, like in a video game, it also runs the risk of like claiming the story as a video game, and portraying it as if it is the only truth. And that would be, I think, anti-political, maybe, because politics is all about, having the possibility of dissensus and disagreements and a plurality of perspectives. So I think that might be a challenge for like game developers in the future years. Like, how can we foster that kind of political engagement as well?
Really interesting point there, Anthony. Thank you very much. Adam, anything to add there as well?
Yeah, I would love to. Anthony actually summarized that pretty nicely, and I agree with that. What I wanted to add is that perspective that I'm definitely on the side that politics should be embedded in the game mechanics. Maybe not should be. It's something that I'm more interested in games. Like it speaks to me more when I'm encouraged just to explore some ideas in the game, and I can have my own thoughts about that. Even if that's a limited space, I think it's in the nature of games. Like play and games as an activity is something that children or even animals do as a sort of preparing to real life, just to experimenting with the skills and ideas before they will try them in the real life. And I think the games could be the same for politics. So we have some sort of closed space in which we can do something else that we do in real life. For example, in Frostpunk 1, you have a dilemma: should you send children to coal mine or not at the beginning of the game. And this is not something I would do in the real life, for sure. But the game is something that can allow me to explore such ideas. Like, for example, Frostpunk is rooted in early 20th century, so it was custom for children to work, and the city is facing the apocalypse, right? I'm not arguing for children labor, don't get me wrong, but I'm saying that the games could be a space to explore different political ideas, and it will be more powerful if we come to conclusion by ourselves when playing the game.
So it's important. It kind of like what echoing what Anthony said earlier about also leaving still space for discussion and dialogue. Yeah. Otherwise, it's kind of the antithesis of the point.
Yeah, definitely. We should still, as a game developers, make sure that the messages that could be sourced from our game, ideas that can be rooted from our game, are some kind of in line with what we're trying to achieve. But I think it's more respectful towards player to actually have them such possibility.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. We've mentioned the word extreme a couple times throughout this stream so far, and I'm wondering if there are any examples of games that maybe, in your opinion, took it too far, or what even for you is the definition of taking it too far within the realm of politics in a game. What is too far, actually? And does that look different within games than it might look in different forms of art? What is taking it too far? And have you seen examples of a game not taking it too far, in your opinion, and then fostering a really nuanced discussion? So looking for good practices and extreme practices there.
Yeah, I think nobody is very eager to speak about negative examples as we as game developers or people very close to game development. At least speaking for myself, I know that.
I can do
okay, you can go ahead.
No, but please do.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that making games is quite difficult in my opinion, and it's especially working in a large team, like trying to balance all the things like gameplay, fun, external pressure, story, and so on. And it doesn't surprising me that sometimes games are too shallow with showing some political topics, or they're just not honest enough with their attitude towards it. But yeah, I think that we are still trying to find our voice as a medium. Mm-hmm. And now time for more controversy.
Paolo, I think you wanted to
I like to go. I would like to talk shit about my colleagues in the game industry, but honestly, I cannot really think of any. I really follow this field very closely, and I have been for a long time, and I cannot really think about examples that have created controversy for being too kind of like outspoken. Honestly, in some extent, if a game is outspoken, just people don't play it or something. Like there's never a shortage of games that are not outspoken, right? And I can think of games that are that maybe they were not nuanced enough or felt paternalistic. Maybe like Detroit become humans. Had which I think is actually a pretty good game, but it had some kind of like allegory that felt a bit like too on the nose, a little bit too heavy-handed in that like it was just presenting androids as a metaphor for racial dynamics, especially in the United States, and it felt like, well, just talk about the topic, you don't really need to bring robots in the thing. But anyway, so like there has been even that I think is into some extent to create some thoughts anyway. It creates a conversation in any case. But what I wanted to say really is like the idea of nuance is sometimes, especially in societies in which politics is very polarized, especially polarized into sort of like sides. Sometimes nuance is almost like a shorthand for like more like centrist liberal sort of like view, like the idea that, oh yeah, there aren't people on the left or on the right. It's more like everybody has their own humanity, and we have to recognize the differences, and if there is some kind of truth, the truth is in the middle. That kind of idea, I think, is very present in games, and it's very strategically important. So for the future game industry people that are concerned or like freaked out about the possibility of of having politics accidentally in their game, like one way that the industry typically solves it is by having a kind of ambiguity that is built in, that is like like there are no good guys, no bad guys, everybody's kind of bad anyway. And to me, that is a bit of like a cowardly sort of way to deal with the potential political references that you end up doing. So to me, it's a cop out, yeah, as we say in the United States. But yeah, it's an easy way to sort of like get out of that. And sometimes it works with certain role playing mechanism that you're sort of like building your own path through this, and maybe it's good. But sometimes it's just very, very strategic in being like we want to be ambiguous in order to not make a statement. And I can think of like BioShock Infinite, the creators specifically say that we want this to be a Rorschach test. So it's like if you're a leftist, you might see some leftist stuff. If you're a rightist, you might see as a confirmation of your ideology, or in some extent.
Yeah, I was also thinking that probably, I don't know any concrete examples, but what for me would be too far is precisely those games that call themselves not political, to the extent that it becomes almost even propaganda, where it infuses you with like ideological underpinnings without making it explicit. And I mean, there's so many games that are full of colonialism, imperialism, slavery, sexism, and so on and so on. So I think those are like the games that take it too far. And maybe a counter like nice example that I find is uh you probably know the famous nuke scene in Fallout 4, um where there's like a very shocking, if I remember correctly, but at the same time almost beautiful moment where you see the consequences of the actions. And I think that's what maybe like fiction in general, but video games in particular, are really good at, because they require identification and imagination on a very personal lived experience level, where we could use video games to connect the larger macro scale political events and decisions and so on to what they actually might mean on like a micro level of lived experience. And I think that's something we talk about way too, like not enough in politics in general. Yeah, I don't know.
Jumping
That's just
from thank you very much, Anthony and Paolo. Anything else to add there before I jump to our next question? So a word that has come up, it came up quite a few times in the questions that were submitted was, and I don't think you will be surprised, nor do I think the audience will be surprised that this word is coming up, is censorship. And I wonder with these games, either if they have very clear political messages, I think more so if it's a game that really is forthright with its message and political inclination. What are our censorship concerns prevalent often in the games industry? And if so, how are those censorship challenges anticipated or dealt with? Or have you even had personal experience with the topic? The
Well,
irony of us talking about the irony of us talking about censorship and then nobody talking.
Well, it depends. It depends on the marketplace, and I think it is, like probably the best way to, us right after, having freedom of speech embedded in laws and constitutions. The other second best thing to have is multiple marketplaces and ways to distribute and circulate your games freely, and that's why I'm a bit of a proponent on things that run on your browser, because they don't depend on third party and things like that. But like we had, like I can think of examples of, for example, like the games that were not actually making any overt political statement. I'm blanking on the title, but because they were distributed in China and because they had references to like very obscure references that people in the West will not even get to the president of the People's Republic of China and so on. Because of that, they were taken down the market, right? Like taking down the marketplace, like taking down Steam. And at the same time, just the other day, I was playing a game that is currently on Steam, has been on Steam for like many years. That is basically a pro-Hamas game in which you're just like a very directly, it's like a shooter game in which you're like just shooting the IDF soldiers, and it's still on Steam. So the censorship aspect really depends on the political framework, and that's what I'm thinking of when I think about censorship, rather than backlash from doing something that can be unpopular. And then there is like a type of censorship that is more like market censorship that depends on well, for example, like since you asked, I made like bunch of years ago, I made a game that was first approved in the Apple Store, in the App Store, and then almost immediately taken down and because the game was kind of like an anti-Apple anti-Apple game in a way. It was about the sort of like the politics and the ethics of consumer electronic production. So it was about like this phone, it's called Phone Story. It was about this phone sort of like talking to you, to the user about the story of the electronics that are in the phone. And because of that, because it was essentially Apple figured out a way to take it off the marketplace. Whereas Google was fine with it. So it kind of like really depends on there is like a kind of censorship, but that is not that might be just like based on this show is showing some like inappropriate graphic images because it was showing children working in the mines in Congo. And to me, it's more like a matter of are you more disturbed by the pixelated depictions of children working in the mines of Congo, or the fact that right now in Congo there are children working in the mines that are digging rare minerals that go into our PlayStations and such. So
I think
Yeah, go right ahead, Konst.
no, I was going to say it. I think this also feeds into the previous topic that we discussed, because unfortunately, if as Paolo said, unfortunately, if you address these issues head on, you might get unfortunately censored, like the stuff that he said about China or the Apple Store. So then, I guess the way to go is to subvert this and change it a little bit, but unfortunately, that will make it less impactful. So I guess this is another thing that, as a game developer, you need to discuss. So maybe you obscure the references and hide it, but the message is still there, so people can get to it on their own. So you can argue this in front of the censors and get around it. So this is kind of, in my head, it's a fine line of balancing between, giving the political message directly, and like, of course, say making sure that you do not get censored or taken down, or being like, oh, why do you say these things about us? It's not true. Our iPhones are made perfectly fine.
And Paolo, if I can ask, what happened eventually with the phone story? Was it ever available again on the Apple Store?
No, but I also didn't resubmit it. In a way, I received a phone call directly from Cupertino, which is not a very common thing that happens when you're submitting an app. And in our conversation, it was fairly clear that it just didn't want that thing on their store. And but I never really resubmitted. It is also possible that if I did it now after that kind of conversation has been a little bit more digested, maybe they are fine. I will just have to remove some kind of aspects of it. The game I was mentioning was Devotion. It's like a Taiwanese game that had some references that angered the Chinese authorities. But it wasn't political.
Yeah, sure. I think when we talk about censorship, another word that really quickly pops into people's minds as well is propaganda. And that's also a big topic that I think we would be remiss not to cover during the stream as well. I'm wondering, are there examples of notable examples that you can think of politicians using games as a campaigning medium? Are there examples where you really think that it was bordering the line of political propaganda?
If memory serves correctly, I believe in Animal Crossing even there was, I can't remember, I think it was one of the American presidents, they got their campaign inside, part of it, inside of Animal Crossing, and like there were transparents that were put there, like you can put it on your lawn in the game, which was very clever. So this is, I think, a way to get it the political message across, and like I think it was a interesting way of politicians using this in order to get more voters because it's directly in the game. Can't remember which one it was. What was it? I believe it was Obama, like in 2008, but I might be mistaken.
Yeah,
Do you
Obama.
think? Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I remember that Obama had a billboard campaign, Burnout, and other EA games, but it was more like based on that they are just implemented in-game ads to the game, and they just put ads inside the game. But yeah,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, the games for political campaigning that have been around for a while, they are considered not particularly successful. Like that's why we don't remember them. But yeah, John Kerry had some. John McCain had them. Yeah, like I would almost think almost every electoral campaign in the United States from 2000 to 2010 there were little political games that were happening, but it's kind of like that is not propaganda to me. Propaganda is more like when you have like a state entity or a religious entity, since the propaganda term was invented by the church, by the Catholic Church. You have a sort of like state entity that is producing media to affect public opinion, so that is a bit more rare. There was definitely a failed example in Italy, like the current prime minister, like a neo-fascist prime minister, had like a little video game in which you were, I guess, like reviving some aspects of World War II from a revisionist perspective and so on. But I would say like the probably the most maybe like conspicuous example of propaganda game is America's Army from the early 2000s. America's Army was a shooter, and because it was entirely founded and designed by the United States Army, that to me it can be sort of like seen as essentially that's like a state sort of like mandated thing. It didn't even have that much of like a propagandistic tone to it, other than being there to engage and recruit people to actually fight those wars, and so essentially depicting wars in the Middle East.
Yeah, so I think when I hear that, then I can presume that the word propaganda, it really matters then, Paolo, who is making the game and also with what intention. If you give America's Army as an example, it's very clear that it was from the United States Army with the intention of recruiting.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to yeah, I mean, it's a good way to define it, because sometimes people use propaganda to just say, like, again, like an overtly political piece of culture or something, which I don't think is correct, or is not very useful as a definition, I guess.
I think that I think that we are kind of lucky in terms of game industry and propaganda, by the definition that Paolo actually stated. So it's quite difficult to make an engaging game, and it's quite costly to make a game that have a mainstream appeal. And for politicians would like to do both in the same time. Like the game need to be engaging to actually catch on and become some sort of viral or a tool that is persuasive. And it requires a lot of skill, and also politicians with propaganda try to appeal the masses, often masses in the one country only, and games are more like a one global market. Two, it's quite it's not that easy to make the game that appeals to masses and try to be try to promote some political stance in terms of its message.
Yeah, I think of a question just popped up in my mind. I'm sorry, this did not come from the question list. But by the way, if you are in the audience and a question pops up in your head, please submit it in the chat. Just put a Q beforehand, type out your question, and we'll get to it as soon as possible. A question did pop up in my mind that wasn't on the sheet. And I'm thinking we're talking about propaganda and games made by politicians to share messages, which actually might not be, or very well might not be, seen as propaganda. If I were to be a politician, Paolo, for example, you say that not many of these games have been successful historically. Say I am a politician and I want to make a game. I want to collaborate with the games industry. What kind of message would you have for me?
What kind of message?
What kind of message would you have to say to me about like the content of the game that I'm creating as a politician?
Well, I would say I would start by identifying essentially like what kind of audience you want to connect with. Sometimes the assumption is that games are kind of like for children or younger people, but that's kind of not the case anymore, because people play also in advanced age, but are also like pretty senior people that play certain kind of games. So I will start probably from that, and from the kind of message that you want to convey. I feel like sometimes when games or I don't know, whatever technological gizmo are used for political communication, I think sometimes the communication is more meta on a meta level. Is the fact that this president is using video games is a way to signal that this president or this politicians is in touch with the new generations, is like interested in technology or whatever happens, because games normies still see the video games as technology or some kind of like cutting edge in development field.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. With this second part, I think that it would be more beneficial for politicians to actually use games as an example or a space that the politician can interact with already existing games. I think that much more popularity will bring the appearing on, I don't know, Fortnite Island or some sorts of that than making your small flash game. And it also can be positively used. I remember the interesting example from Poland. In Poland, there were in one of the biggest cities in Poland, Kraków, there was a planned road construction. It's supposed to be a bypass around the city, and one of fans, I don't know, hobbyists of urban planning and avid fan of City Skyline used the heavily modded version of this game to make a video showing faults and faults in how this bypass road was planned, and proved that it will lead to massive traffic. And actually, it got some traction. It became some sort of viral, and the city changed its plans after that. So it's an awesome use of video games, and it also became used by politicians in such a way, right, to present their ideas in some sort of a sandbox game, some strategy game, or something like that.
That's a really interesting example, and one that I would never know of before this evening, of politicians using the game's community or streaming, for example, as a way to connect with their audiences. Anyone else want to add anything? If you were on the phone right now with a politician, what would you tell them about making a game?
It depends on politician.
I'm sure it does. I think there are also a lot of students also in the audience, and some that, to be completely honest, maybe do not care about politics at all. I think actually a lot of students are in that boat. What kind of message do you have to them about including political themes in a game? Are there benefits? Should they just steer clear of it totally if they are uninterested? A message to those who are uninterested in the topic.
I think, well, politics will care about you anyway, regardless. So, and politics will enter no matter what. So it is, don't see it as a kind of like an additive aspect of like, here's my game, how can we make it, political, but see it as a part of, just like making culture. You're making culture, you're not making software, right? Even software has its own politics, but it's a little bit more subtle, perhaps. But yeah, like whenever you have a game that has any reference to the real world, imagine, to history, to the present, to the future, you're likely to have like, political issues. Let's call them ideological issues or cultural issues at large. So don't see it as something that you have to do, but it's something that you have to think about. I'm sort of like summarizing what has been said.
Yeah, it's a really interesting statement that you make there. You are not making software, you are making culture.
And art, I would add. So it's
Anthony or Konst want to jump in there?
No, I just literally just to add to what Paul was saying, that it's also art, and not so it's software and art, and because it's art, therefore you're creating culture, and of course you need to be mindful of the messages that you put in it and execute it well.
I just want to add that it doesn't, of course, help if you're feeling forced to convey political messages through video games. And perhaps part of the problem is that we think of politics as this like too big of a thing, where politics is just like having really strong opinions about really big issues. But politics is also like in very small scale, micro level levels of experience. For example, like hand gestures or the way we stand on the street or walk also has political valences. And that's very often also part of like video games, and just it's not maybe about conveying political messages, but being aware of the kind of political sensibilities that you're always already implementing in your video game design, because it's, as other people have said here, it's inevitable, and it's very interesting and necessary that we do that.
Yeah, I also would like to add that being interested in politics actually can make your game more interesting, better. Like, for example, if you are trying to do a good world building, right, and make your world believable, it's very difficult without understanding how politics works in real life. Even if you're making fantasy game or a science fiction game, you can bring a lot of real world examples, and it will be fresh. It will be more speaking to the people. It will be more relatable than just being inspired by other piece of media, of pop culture, of other games. So I think it's a great source of inspiration. Something as already other people said, like it's a very you cannot avoid it anyway, so why not take advantage of it and make your game better with understanding of this topic?
And in terms of, Paolo, go right ahead. Do you want to add
There is
something?
a way those questions are formulated that makes me think that maybe students are are feeling a bit the pressure, especially if you are working in a student project that doesn't have any commercial sort of like weight on it, or an independent project, or seeing themselves as independent. Maybe they are feeling the pressure of being like, well, but what is this? My game about cats planting. Like, should it, planting a little garden, should it have like a message about, ecology or something? Or like I would say, like, it seems like that the messaging and the politics here is more like those fairly broad and already shared ideas about, well, maybe we shouldn't destroy the earth, or maybe peace is better than war, or maybe tolerance and respecting each other. Like, so those messages to me are first already like broadly shared by the most of the population that plays video games, so everybody under 40 and more. So like probably there's not like an urgent need for that unless you're really feeling it. And if you're not feeling it, and if you're even asking yourself that question, maybe that's yeah, maybe like it's better to
Maybe
really
it's not a
not even not even
Exactly.
trying rather than having like an alpha, so very generic kind of like feel good message. I think I'm more like interested in topics that are very specific to a time and place and community, rather than the environment that kind of sucks, huh? No.
Yeah, I think
Exactly.
being
Yeah,
honest.
maybe it's go ahead, Adam.
No, I just wanted to say that I very much agree with that. Also, like being honest is a very important value when it comes to the politics in games. Like being honest with your intention and that you really want to speak something. Yeah, so it's sometimes better to just stick to your ground.
So maybe it's like we said earlier. Maybe it's an opportunity, but not necessarily a responsibility of game developers. We are almost at the end of the stream. I cannot believe that time just flew by. I want to ask you for Adam, Anthony, Konst, and Paolo, if you have any last messages for students, for game developers, for just audience members out there who are thinking, how do I make games, or how do I make something? Maybe there are non-game developers out there. How do I make something that is societally meaningful? And we're gonna, I think, close out this stream on a very heavy question, very loaded question. What is your advice regarding making something that is meaningful or more meaningful to society? Adam, for example, you have a newsletter, Break the Loop, about meaningful games.
Yes.
So I want to kind of leave this stream with advice for people who are looking to make games, to make whatever they do meaningful to society.
Sure. I think I'm just thinking intensively because I had a feeling that very good wrap-ups just were said by in previous question, but yeah, I think that honesty is one thing, as I mentioned in the previous question. So I think it's important to even set your goals in terms of how the player should feel after playing your game. Maybe that should, but what emotions you would try to evoke in players, what message is personally important for you, and what topics you would like to explore. Like sometimes we are we are focused on making games fun, because it's a pretty good challenge to actually make them playable and make players engage in this time and make sure that they are having good time with our game. But I think it's important to not forget about this core idea of your game, what type of meaning it should have, and yeah, and also what I was saying about how players feel after playing your game. So I think it's very important to make sure that that our games can inspire somebody to act, making players uh, more having more power to engage with reality. I think that it shouldn't be our main concern, for example, to make the player playing our game as long as possible, as sometimes some games try to do. It's more important how they will feel after this experience.
That's a really good closing point, Adam. Really focus, narrow in on the emotions that you really intend your game player to experience. Anthony, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question. The first thing that popped into my mind was, well, as I said before, it's important not to try to make like universal claims or not trying to claim the truth, but leave space for openness and, fruitful engagement. But I was reminded of this challenge that maybe architects also have, where they have to like build a home and make sure that it is meaningful for the people that will live in it. But it's of course not only the architect that faces the challenge of making it meaningful, it's the people who will live there and need to make it their home that are faced with maybe an even bigger challenge. So I think here there's like a similar part parted responsibility of or parted challenge where there's the game developers needing to think about how can we make this societally relevant, but also the players, like how do they engage with it and what kind of societal relevance comes out of that engagement. So I think if I'm saying that, my advice would be talk to the players that play your game, and then you'll maybe find out who you are making the games for. And just asking that question, who are you developing games for, in itself is already a start of making it societally relevant.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anthony. I'm glad that we also touched on the role and the responsibility actually of the player as well, and the importance of talking to the people who you are actually intending to play your game, to understand them better, and to make it actually tangibly meaningful. Thank you very much. Const, any final words for our audience out there?
Yes, I would say, as Anthony said earlier, know your audience, and I would say find interesting themes, and make sure that you start conversations about it and present them well. Research them, figure out what the topic is about, present it, show it, make the sparkle discussions, questions, showcase the core of the issue or themes that you're trying to showcase, and translate them. Make the players feel like they're experiencing these topics that you're saying. So whatever your message is and whatever you want to give as an experience, show it to them, make them experience it so they feel it, and put them in the shoes of people dealing with these themes when talking politically, so they can, even if they are not it doesn't match with their viewpoint, they can at least partially understand it and put them in another person's shoes, and start the conversation and make it thought-provoking.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Const. I really, really appreciate it. And last but not least, Paolo, your final words for our audience.
I really was hoping that there was no time for me to for this answer.
Surprise, Paolo. There's always time.
What I would say is that if you're a student right now, first, you're still in time to not get into the game industry if you want to do something meaningful with your life. And just putting it out there, it's still not too late. It is a bit of a weird position to be. Like there's this world, there's this community called Games for Change. It's a festival, but it's also a website that covers essentially like this question. It tries to answer this question: what if you wanted to make games that are societally meaningful? So it covers like educational games, political games in the sense of advocacy games, and so on. And it's interesting. It's rich. Has been around for 2 decades or more. And the feeling that I sometimes have when I'm in sort of like traverse this community is that it's a lot of people that are sort of like finding themselves maybe like in the industry, maybe middle-aged, mid-career, and they're starting to have kind of like existential crisis about like, what the hell am I doing with my life? Because it makes sense to make like fun games when you're, young, but then you're starting to be like, oh, why do I have to like, trick players into jumping platforms for hours and hours? What does it add to the world? So what I would say in maybe in a more constructive way is that this question of meaningfulness of your work eventually will probably emerge in your life. So it's probably better to ask yourself the question now that rather than being well into the game industry and sort of like locked and tracked on a very specific career and be like, well, now how can I do something like, how can I add meaning to this very specific contingents that I'm in? So yeah, ask yourself your question like now.
And if I'm already in the games industry and I'm wondering now, how do I make my content more meaningful? Any advice you would have?
It depends. Yeah. Hit me up. Send me an email with your specific thing, with your specific idea.
Yes. Send Paolo an email with your specific request.
I can give you maybe like some feedback based on a very specific proposal. I don't have I'm too deep into this thing. I've been thinking a little bit too much into this thing to have like a quick general purpose suggestion. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's not a worry at all. But ask yourself, I think, Paolo, what you say is really important. Ask yourself this question now. And even sometimes like we find ourselves in the same job for years and you find yourself kind of like in Groundhog Day doing the same thing over and over again. And it's actually really important to be asking ourselves these questions. Like, what can I do for me and my life and my career that is meaningful? How do I make content that is meaningful? So just the simple answer of asking the question, don't be afraid to ask it to yourself is definitely a really important suggestion. Thank you so much, Adam, Anthony, Konst, and Paolo. This has been a really fruitful discussion, super thought-provoking. I really appreciate you spending your time with us this evening or afternoon for Paolo. If we could get all the appreciation in the chat for our fantastic panelists for this evening. Also, any games or content that we've mentioned during this stream, I'll also link it in the YouTube description when we go ahead and post that very momentarily. Thank you to our fabulous panel members. Really appreciate it. And if you are watching out there, stay tuned just for a couple more minutes. I'll give you some more details about how to keep up with Game for Thought while we are technically in our off season. But hang tight. Once more, thank you so much for our panelists this evening, and I'll be back in just a minute. Hang tight. And just like that, season four of Game for Thought has now come to a close. I have to thank you all so much for supporting and watching and really engaging in these discussions that we have had this season about being a parent of a gamer, religion and games and politics we had this evening, mental health and crunch culture, violence in games as well, serious games. Thank you for watching this season. Thank you for engaging with our content and taking part in these societally relevant discussions here at Hoest, Digital Arts and Entertainment. A big thank you once again to our panelists for this evening, Adam, Paolo, Konstantin, and Anthony. Many thanks to you. This conversation obviously would not take place without our panelists, so many thanks. A big thanks additionally to Casper, who is our tech expert and master over there. I really have to also thank Bradley, who's moderating the chat together with Emily. Many thanks to those who are in the tech room right now and have been also this season for Game for Thought. Of course, thank you to Hoest and Hoest Digital Arts and Entertainment, the Flemish Audio Visual Fund, Flanders Game Hub, the Flemish Games Association, Elevate, Pirate PR, and Robbie Bishop. Thank you to all of you who make Game for Thought a reality. This has been such a wonderful journey, and don't worry if you feel like you're going to miss the Game for Thought streams. We have more content, which is the great news. On both the websites of the Flemish Games Association, so that is www.flega.be, and also the Flanders Game Hub website, that is www.flandersgamehub.be. On both of those websites, there are blog posts, basically summary recaps of all of the Game for Thought streams that we have recorded this season, some from last season as well. So as a nice recap, as a nice overview, you can read those blog articles over there. And we also have relaunched our Game for Thought podcast, which is now on Spotify. For students, Hust, Max, Joe, and March are tackling more ethically relevant topics in the games and digital entertainment space. Check out Game for Thought on Spotify. And again, I will link all of these resources in the description box on YouTube. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for engaging in these topics with us. And I really hope that, again, that we have opened up a space to have really important conversations, not only about the technical elements that have to do with games and digital entertainment, but the things also that really shape our society and world around us. Without further ado, I am Allie Weiss. Thank you so much for tuning in to Game for Thought Season 4. Wonderful times. Can't wait to see you next year. Many thanks. Have a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. And I will see you next academic year. Bye, everyone.